Please join me in welcoming King Lee. Thank you.
Thank you. I wasn't sure how to pitch this, so I'm going to cover some basic areas where nuclear is at the moment, where it can fit in the future energy space and some of the innovation. I'll just quickly run through some of the material. Does it? Sorry, I'll try to advance the slides. Doesn't seem to be. Oh, right. Seems to be a bit. Okay. Okay, right. Thank you. I'm from the World Nuclear Association. Is basically the trade body for nuclear energy, and we represent almost all the uranium mining and fuel elements, and also the nuclear reactor vendors and nuclear operators, as well as nuclear support services. Next slides, please. We talk a lot about energy, and particularly, I think, from a Western world, OECD advanced country point of view, driven by climate change. But for majority of the world, actually, the energy is the part for development, is the important bit, and particularly for socio-economic development. Even in UK, the current nuclear project, Hinkley C, is about 20 billion of investment. 16 billion of that will be invested in UK, for UK company. So increasingly, for large capital investment project, country want to consider the local content and socio-economic development, not only the energy that can come derived from that project, and that's quite important element. Next slide, please. Perhaps looking at the different pathway to a net zero or meeting Paris Agreement, and there are different pathways to achieve that. I think perhaps the key point is nuclear, in our view, is not competing with renewable. All the energies required to reach Paris Agreement, and some of these, particularly, for example, the IEA net zero scenario, estimated nuclear have to more or less double to reach net zero, and some of the IPCC report, 1.5 degree report, then we do of the Rose scenario, estimate nuclear have to increase by six times, representing 25% of the energy electricity mix. Next slide, please. Perhaps this part is particularly becoming more important with a ESG lens or sustainable finance lens. We recently supported a UN report on looking at life cycle assessment of all range of different energy sources. Nuclear came out the lowest greenhouse gas emission, around 5.5 from a global perspective of gram of CO2, lower than the other renewables. But more importantly, there was a previous panel talk about CCUS technology. Well, CCUS technology still emit considerable amount of CO2. And we're glad to see that in the new EU taxonomy of sustainable finance nuclear, there's proposed legislation to include that within the EU sustainable finance legislation. Next slide, please. Where's nuclear at the moment? It generates about just over 10% of the global electricity, and is the second largest source of low carbon electricity. And for advanced country, it's the largest source. There's about 55 nuclear reactor under construction and representing 57 gigawatts. And you can see about 12 nuclear power plants have been connected to grid in the last 12 years or so. Next slide, please. We've just done some work with the UN in terms of exploring the role of nuclear in the future energy mix, and this is a pictorial diagram. We're all familiar with potentially the large reactors for electricity generation. Perhaps not many people are aware that nuclear have been used for district heating, particularly in Nordic countries, and this is going to be particularly important for the northern area, is how to decarbonize heating. And the challenge is also to decarbonize industry and providing high temperature heat. We talked about some of the technologies that's available to do that, and as mentioned by the previous panel about hydrogen production. And there's different now, increasingly, some of the technology providing different size of nuclear energy in terms of not in addition to the large gigawatts that's currently in place and being developed, also what's called SMR, small modular reactors, and micro-reactors, particularly for remote areas. Next slide, please. We've seen, particularly from this COP, the perception and deployment significant change of nuclear energy. For example, UK just announced nuclear aim to contribute 25% of its electricity mix, potentially up to 24 gigawatts. And France, Macron, before the end, his election, and I think it's part of their election campaign, saying that it intend to build 14 large reactors. And this is in addition to other countries, Poland and other Eastern Europe, and as well as the big program in China. And we see Asia as the major, perhaps the nuclear build program around the world. Next slide, please. I'll just touch on perhaps the recent event, particularly before the Ukraine crisis, about the hike in gas. The recent event have brought back energy security and resilience as a major issue, almost back to the 1970s and 80s oil crisis. In my view, this will really drive energy policy moving forward, and this already have major implication, even in the last few months, in terms of UK announcements and some of the country announcements, and in Asia. So climate may not be the main driver for energy policy and affordability. Next slide, please. Just touch on perhaps more of interest to the audience and some of the technology. Baraka is a UAE large reactors delivered by the Korean. So that was successfully developed. There's 4 reactors. I think there's 2 in operation. Then that's more or less delivered to cost and to time. So we do hear quite a lot of news in Western Europe about some of the projects at higher cost and delayed, but that's not always the case. The challenge for, in my view, the Western Europe in terms of delivery is that we haven't built new reactors for the last 20 years. So from a standing start, the new build it is quite difficult for mature countries. That isn't a problem. So the other Fujian 5 is a new reactor built by China. That's gone to time and to place. And some of the new technologies, for Russia have just implemented 2 years ago a floating reactor providing power and heating to remote island. The Neutron reactor is backed by Bill Gates to provide high temperature heat, and replace for, in addition to thermal storage. So that provides additional boost in the time of high demand. There's a number, Aurora is a micro-reactors, about 1.5 gigawatts, with a completely different technology with what they call thermal heat pipes. Very simple unit. China just put in operation what they call high temperature reactors. This is intending to with direct replacement coal plant. So the high temperature reactors can generate steam about 550 degrees C, 13, about 6 bar. So that's the intention of those reactors, to provide a direct replacement for coal plants. Next slide, please. These are some further examples of innovations, a whole range. There are about 70 different types of new reactors. Two, not only land-based, there's use of floating reactors, particularly, and for using reactors in ships for marine propulsions, and as well as using high-temperature reactors to generate hydrogen instead of using electrolysis, but through chemical thermal process that make much more efficient for hydrogen generation. So hopefully that's a quick canter through the nuclear space and some of the new nuclear development. Thank you. Thank you.
Sit down for a sec. Thank you so much for that. I say quick canter through such a huge and profound industry sector. We do have to go for coffee in a minute. I just have the liberty of one question, which it sounds frivolous, but I think there is some intent there. Like your job title, Director of Harmony, or the Harmony Program. Could you just elaborate? Many of us were captivated.
Yeah, so we have a program which set a vision for the ambition for nuclear. So basically, the Harmony Program set our vision for the future of electricity, where nuclear provides 25% of the global electricity mix. Yeah. Depending on which scenario, this could include about up to 1,200 gigawatts of nuclear. So it's about 3 times currently.
And this is the Harmony Program has got that kind of mission.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for clarifying on that. And I want to reflect on the point that really I zeroed in on, was that climate change may not be the biggest driver for nuclear or for transformation, actually energy security. I think with that thought, I would like us to thank King for his presentation, and let's go for coffee back here at 3:30. Fascinating session, partnerships between CVCs and VCs at 3:30. So thank you very much, King.
Thank you.